Alright, so today I'm going to be trying to figure out how I'm going to route a roundover onto the stringer for these mini cruiser boards. Aside from just being cosmetically really good looking to have the roundover, it's also really important for me to remove all this extra glue from the layup. There's always going to be some boards that have some extra glue coming out, no matter what you do. And there's no real good way to go in with a sand block or anything and clean up this surface without damaging this surface. So the router and doing a roundover is a perfect solution for that. The issue for trying to do a roundover here is that normally when you're doing a roundover, you use a roundover bit like this, and it's got this following bearing. The follow bearing follows the edge of the workpiece and makes sure the bit and the router follows that same edge. And so this is a straight line, so the bearing keeps the bit following the straight line, and what it stops is the bit from being able to bite in really deeply and make big notches like that out of it. But on the boards, there's no surface here that I can follow. And I can't even get the bit down far enough because the bearing's in the way. So addressing that is really simple and really easy and straightforward. You've just got to remove the following bearing. So you just unscrew the little bolt on there, and the bearing's mounted on a post. You have to file down or use a drum or something to get rid of the post, and you need to take the material down past the center and past the edges of the carbide, because otherwise if there's material here that can rub, it'll just burn the heck out of the wood. So you've got to, this is actually a little bit of a tedious process, and I actually did slip with the file once and took a couple tiny chips out of the carbide. But it doesn't seem to affect the cut. It's very smooth, so all's well that ends well. So once you get to this point, you've removed your bearing, which means you've removed your ability to follow an edge and stop this from happening. So I need to come up with another edge to use for the router to follow, and come up with another way of following it. So one way might be to use a block like this on the router base and set that block so it's at the edge of the router, of the bit here, and just have it follow the edge I'm routing, you know, like that. The issue with that is, as I mentioned before, I'm trying to clean up glue that came out. And so this edge might not always be perfectly straight. It might have little bumps in it, and all those little bumps from the glue can show up in the roundover actually pretty dramatically, more than you'd expect. The second issue is, how am I supposed to be following this edge precisely if I'm just rounding it over? If I have to go over it a second time to get rid of any inconsistencies and there's nothing left to follow, how do I do that? So this first edge here is a bit troublesome. Second is the outside edge. Now, the problem with trying to follow the outside edge is the fact that the layup of these boards isn't super precise. They're plenty straight and parallel for looking at by eye and appearing centered and all that. But for an operation like this roundover, it won't be consistent enough. And there's also a problem as well with glue on this outside edge. I'd have to clean up the edge on the sander before I could use it as a following surface. So both these problems are true for the inside stringer edge and the outside stringer edge, and both outside board edges. So what we have to do is put on our own edge and clamp something down or attach something somehow that's going to be exact for what we want to do. So the solution I've come up with is to clamp down a straight edge onto the board to act as a new following surface. And for this new following surface, we're going to use this outside edge of the stringer as our reference. And we just are going to measure in at 2 different points, and we're going to get out a straight edge from it. So first of all, with the glue problem, no matter how much craziness is going on here from the glue that's coming off the edge of the stringer, we're always going to get a straight line out of it. So that gets rid of most of the glue problem. So the second thing that this straight edge does is it allows me to make changes to my reference surface, which was the outer edge of the stringer, and by rounding it over and doing all that stuff to it, doing my process to it, without affecting my following surface. So that means I can make multiple passes without worrying about screwing up the surface I'm measuring from, right? So now what I need to do is come up with a really easy way to consistently measure the distance I need to place my straight edge at. So I've already done a couple boards just to test and make sure this method's going to work. And what I did for that is I just measured by hand and placed the straight edge. I had it in a little bit so that I'd be make sure I'm not cutting away too much and cutting into the stringer. And I just take a pass, and then I'd come in and tap, and then I'd take another pass, and that would allow me to kind of dial it in and make sure I was getting it right. That's too much work to do on every single board. I just want something that I can clamp up, make the measurement, and it's just good to go. So I need to make some sort of jig. And and I did also want to mention here, what I also did is on the bottom of the router, I attached this base plate here. So this block prevents the router from tipping over like that as it's riding on the stringer here. So it can't tip and fall down, because if you do that, it's dropping the bit down and it allows it to take a bigger bite. So this is important. And ideally it's the same height as the stringer. And this is close, but I'm gonna have to redo it and make it a little bit better. I also messed up a little bit too in how I implemented it. So this edge here, this front edge, is kind of where the tipping action happens. And I lined it up with the center of the bit, but I should have lined it up over here with the edge of the carbide where the router, or where the roundover starts. Because having it over just a little bit, it does let it drop a little bit. Moving on from that, I need to figure out a way to consistently measure and get this distance right. So the distance between the straight edge here and the edge of the stringer here needs to exactly match the distance from the edge of this corner of the carbide where the roundover starts with this outside surface here. So I need to find a way to accurately measure that distance. Now you'd think it would be pretty easy to just get my calipers and measure from here to here. The problem is this spins, and so I need to measure it at exactly the outermost distance. How am I going to do that? Well, here's what I've come up with. So what I've done here is I've just routed into this board, whoop, and just taken a big chunk out of it, and then turned off the router and held it in place in that position where I stopped at. And then what I did is I took a knife and I scored a line. A knife is a really great way for woodworking to make a mark that is very accurate. Because if a Sharpie line is humongously wide and a knife cut is very, very narrow. So I've marked it with a Sharpie so you can see where I marked it, because on camera you won't be able to see the knife point very well. So because the router is spinning, it marks the whole path of travel and it gets the whole radius of the circle, which is something that I can measure from, not just a point that spins. So what I can do is I can try to come with my calipers and come up with the distance between these two lines directly, or I can do something extra fancy, which might not have any significant difference at all in the measurement. But I can come in with something round that fits into that hole, which is going to sit into that straight edge. And then I can come in here with my calipers, and I can measure flush, so I'm not going at an angle, and I can get exactly what that line is. And that seems like 41.25 millimeters. So that gives me a very, very accurate measurement of the distance from here to there. So now I'm just going to come up with something that's that width that will let me place the straight edge quickly and accurately. So I've got the spacer I've made right here, and I just made it out of some scrap acrylic, and I'm putting it together with acrylic cement. And so I'll go over that once it's all cured and I can move it. For now, I can start on the next thing I need to do. And basically, the rig I have here for clamping on the straight edge and clamping the board to a table is just kind of bad. So I need to make a clamping rig to hold everything together in a lot more easy way. Alright, so to clamp this to a table easily, I'm limited by the reach of the clamp. I can't have it clamped in the middle of the table, I want to have it out by the edge. So to route the stringer all the way up to the end here, the router is going to be coming out basically about that far. So I'm not going to be able to have the clamp inside that width. So I'm thinking what we'll have is a sort of base plate board made out of plywood. And then I don't want to have to screw down. So how is that going to work? So what I think I want to do is have a jig clamped to the table and have the board clamped to the jig. I can clamp the jig down on the outsides, and then I can clamp the board down from down here in the back, and I can just have it held in place. So let's go for something like that. So this is what I got for the spacer, and how I made it is first I took my measurement and I cut out a strip of acrylic on the table saw that was the distance I wanted for the spacer to make. And then what I did, I clamped it to this other piece like that, and then I glued these half rounds to be touching this piece here. And so basically what it's doing is these two half rounds are acting as the registration points to line up the whole spacer. Right? So that's what I got so far. Alright, so what I want to do now is I want to form this spacer so that it follows the curve of the deck, because the deck's got a bit of rocker in it. This is just to make it a little bit easier to use, and to do that I'm going to glue this other piece of acrylic to it, and the glue bond is going to be a lamination, and so it'll hold its shape the same way a board holds its shape once you glue it up. And that should hopefully just make it just a little bit easier to use. So to do that, first I'm just going to glue that up on the flat here and just line that up so that it's evenly spaced. And then I'm going to take it over to the board here, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take one of these spring clamps I've got here, and I'm just going to clamp that up like this. So with the acrylic cement, that should only take a couple minutes to set. And if you look on this other side here, you can see I'm doing something similar with these wood strips. And this will be what I make the straight edge out of. And that way, the straight edge will follow the deck really well, and that'll make the straight edge a lot easier to use. Okay, so it's time to put everything together. So this is what I've got for the base. You put the clamps on into these holes, like that. And that holds the base down, and that can't move or slide or anything. Next, you stick the board in, you lift it up, and it's just gets lightly held under this lip there. Then you grab the straight edge, make sure it's the right way around, and you grab the spacer here. And you make sure that the spacer and the straight edge are lined up, and you hold down these clamps. These clamps, I'm not sure where they came from. I think they're for screen printing. Yeah, these things turned up, so we got those. Next, we should be ready for the router. The router's unplugged, so the router should ride like this. That looks really, really good. Okay, so what's happening is this is able to move and rock sideways like that, which means if I'm routing and I'm pushing on it, it'll bow in and the line won't be straight anymore. So that's something I want to address. But for now, I just want to test that the rest of this is working. So I'm just going to do a pin nail and do that for a temporary solution. There you go. So I've got an idea to address that more permanently, but for now, this should be good. Okay, so let's go over this again. This router is going to be following the line. That's nice and stiff all the way. And if I look at the blade, it all looks really good. So now what I need to do, so that was with the blade not engaging. So I'm going to start with the blade not cutting as deep as I think it's going to need to, and I'll just ease into the right height. And we'll see how this goes. So this spacer was just there to place that, so I'm done with this. See how this goes. Put on the mask. Okay. So I need to lower it some more. I'll just go down millimeter by millimeter. It should. It kind of tapers away from the nose here. I think I need to do for that is round these two edges here. So I'll do that real quick and I'll be right back. So yes, I've rounded these right there. And that should... Much better. Okay. So, let's flip this around. Right, like that. We'll use our spacer to line it up. Right, that was looking good. Then again, I'll do a temporary pin nail for this short-term solution, and then we'll try to get this other side, and we'll see what happens there. All right. I'd say that went pretty smoothly. We'll take this off. I'll try to get this pulled out. Doesn't want to come. All right. Well, there we go. That looks really good with that roundover, and that worked really, really well. So I do have a little bit of something to solve here, where the router can't go down deep enough. It's hitting the edge of the router here is hitting on the base here. So either I have to remove some material from the base, or I have to round over the router base a little bit more. And then I've got to solve this thing from being able to move sideways like it was doing. So I think I can do that right now. All right, so I think by far the easiest way to address this and make it so this straight edge can't bow and buckle sideways is to just add a lot more thickness to it, a lot more plies. And that will make it so, first of all, it's conformed more to the shape of the board and holds that shape a lot more. Because part of the problem is it had a lot of spring back and lost some of that shape. And second of all, yeah, it'll just be stiffer in all directions. So I'm gonna have 5 plies of this, so this is gonna be just over 5/8 of an inch here. So that's pretty darn thick. And so yeah, I'll just start the glue up here. That's a lot more glue than I needed there, but that's fine. There we go. There. There. And this there. That's good. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to have these extra these extra thicknesses, because that's going to make up, I'm going to be gluing it at the edge, not where the stringer's at. So this is going to emulate the thickness of the stringer, like that. And I will just line it up. All right, so that's all glued up, and so I'm just going to let this dry for about 2 or 3 days so that it's really stiff and there's no spring back, and then it should be ready to trim up and then use. And I'll be ready to churn out. Let's see, I already got this one. But yeah, I'll be ready to start rounding the stringers on all my boards I've pressed, and I think I've got at least 3 more to pick up. So yeah, I'd say really big success. It's a really, really simple jig, and it should work really, really well. There we go. Longboard technology, over and out.